Okay, let's explore the sequencer a little bit. I've set up a sequence here. As you can see, in the main area here, it's set to 8 bars. And I've got only 2 of these lanes working. One, you note, is set to gate. The other is set to run. The other option there being mute. So what does this gate thing do? It's pretty subtle, but it's you can, I think, hear what's going on in this example. Here's the sample. I'm triggering it with the keys. If I start the sequencer, the 2 lanes sound the same. They're both set to pitch. We can turn that off. So it's not set to anything. It doesn't matter what the pitch is set to or the octaves. But notice that we've got different gate settings here, and that one of these lanes is set to gate, and we've got a gate knob there. So what happens if I turn that up? What you can see is that the lane that's set to gate is actually controllable by this gate knob. The one that's set to run, the gate knob makes no difference. So that's intriguing. I mean, we can get a level of control that you might not have known was in there. What's more interesting to me is the idea that we can, if we set everything to run so that gate doesn't matter, makes no difference at all what's going on with gate, we can now use the gate sequencer as a modulator without it affecting the actual sequence in any way. It's like disengaged from the sequencer, and it's simply a free modulation sequencer. Okay, so that's one obvious, or perhaps not so obvious use of this gate function. Now let's just take a look at the sequence in general, though. If you double-click here on the notes, in the notes area, you get rid of everything. It defaults. It's the same thing here. Double-click here, and everything goes back to default. In other words, all the control sequences are zeroed out or set to the same. And we can turn on all these lanes here. Let's keep them all at run. Basically what you've got here, in short, is a chord player. In other words, we've got a chord, a key, and a scale set here. We've got chord changes we can set up here, and lengths, etc. So in the sequence, the way that works is that this row plays the root, this row plays the third, and this row plays the fifth. And this top row can be set to a number of different things. The default is set to sevenths, so we can have seventh chords. But we can switch it to sixths, seconds, octaves, 11ths, 12ths. There are lots of different things. The default is sevenths. So to add a note, we simply right-click and move the mouse up. To delete a note, right-click and just right-click on it and it goes away. If you hold the mouse and move generally up, you can fill the whole thing or get rid of it by moving down. So you can actually draw in it. Once it's there, simply clicking on existing notes will remove them. So that's pretty handy. If you right-click, you get these notes with, basically these are held notes. And if you double-click at the end, it seems not to make much difference, but apparently that last thing is for the ending legato note. So these basically are legato or held notes. So you can, it's the kind of the equivalent of, or similar to the gate function here, except that it requires more than one note to be, note grid to be entered. So same thing, right clicking. If you go up, you can fill the thing. If you, to get rid of them though, you go back to left clicking. In other words, right clicking in any direction, or as you scroll along, right clicking, you can't get rid of them with the right click. It takes a left click for that. Okay, another thing is that this reset button is very handy in conjunction with the random function. As long as you're in the same flex and you haven't saved anything, reset will take it back to the last saved position, which was here where we started. So all this, everything I've done so far has just been erased and taken back to this last saved state, which is very handy. Or very annoying if you forgot to save and you have all this work to do left. So I'm going to double click here. That gets rid of all of them again. And I'm going to double click here. That defaults everything there, and everything's now set to run. And if I want this to be the starting place for this flex, of course, I just simply store it. But I'm not going to do that right now. What I'm going to do is right click on the random thing here, which is of course your friend. And if you had saved this at the empty setting, you could hit reset to get there. Since I haven't, I'm just going to double click there, and that does the same thing. So, but let's take a look at some of these other functions. So if you hold the notice, if you read the info hints here, it describes what the various types of sequences are presets in here, and they work around this number 40. So if you go down to low numbers, you get a different kind of thing than if you're at high numbers. I think it's most interesting to start with not many events in the sequencer when you first start playing around with it. Okay, notice that they're all set here to pitch. We're not getting any pitch because there's no pitch information set here. So again, we can scroll through presets here. None of them are making any difference unless they happen to coincide with a stack of notes, so that in this case it makes the most sense to actually manually control them. A couple of other sequencer functions that I've discovered that are a lot of fun to play around with have to do with setting defaults and using randoms. So for instance, in this case, I've used the slider here to set up here between 16, 17, 18, 19. You get a lot of useful single note options. And if we double click in this area, we zero out all of these control functions. And so the sampler, the sequencer, sounds pretty boring. But if we, since they're all set to pitch an octave, we can go in here and try some of these presets for each of these functions. Octave's working nicely. Here's, if you notice this little item here, we turn that on, it basically goes into an auto random mode. Every time the cursor or the playhead starts over again, it re-randomizes everything basically. Let's see. So that's definitely worth playing with. At any time, of course, you can change the top note. It'd be nice to modulate that somehow. Okay, one more thing. Two actually. Well, there's a groove setting here, and many different. It's basically shuffling, but there's many different patterns here. So it's pretty random, but worth playing with. Much more interesting. Just as mysterious as this remix function. Basically, at 0, the playhead simply moves straight through. But if we start stepping up through the patterns here, the best way to do that is to click on the field and use the arrow keys on your keyboard. You can see that it's sort of looks pretty random. Actually, it's not at all random. It's just not very predictable. However, there is a kind of intriguing way to explore these things it's still mysterious, but it's definitely interesting. If you switch to the B panel, you actually come to a table that shows you what each of these remix settings is all about. So here's straight through. If we go up 1, so very hard to tell what the logic here is, but basically you can not only see these things, but you can redraw them. So I've started here at number 12, not wanting to mess with the initial ones, but ready to play with them at number 12. Now notice what's happened here, that it looks like that area is grayed out. That's because this is a standard reactor table, and as such, if you right click on it, you get to this really complicated menu of options. And we're in select mode, meaning that I can copy, paste, process, do a lot of interesting things here. So for instance, I can process this by mirroring X reverses it. Now, what it was doing initially is, I have no idea what those marks made it do specifically, but now you can see that most of the action is going in the other direction compared to the way it was before. I'll reverse that again. Keep reversing. Doing the wrong thing. So now you can see that the general motion is forward. The mystery is, here's a good example of what's completely mysterious about this. If we go back to number 1 here, this is playing straight through. No changes, nothing fancy about it. So, but if we go here and select everything and copy it, and then go, say, to 12 again, select everything, paste it, there it is. It's not going straight through. The table looks exactly the same, but as you can see, the playhead is not moving in a completely even way, so I don't know what to make of that. At any rate, it is interesting that we can still go in here and make this go backwards. The rabbit hole is pretty deep here, so there's one other thing I want to show you that's perhaps worth playing with. If we go to Process, we can choose yet another dense, complicated panel here, which is pretty neat. We can set values here for, in this case, rotate. Let's set it to 3, and if we click the rotate button, watch the blue grid up there. We can go. X doesn't seem to be doing much of anything. But we can add value in small amounts. And there, this is weird. A tiny little shift, and all of a sudden we're getting nothing. So I'm going to set it back. Now we're back in business. But what if we rotate it? No, that's not doing a thing. So you can see this, as I said, the mystery is deep here. So once we hit the sweet spot, there's things to play with. Start factor, I don't know what that means. Something interesting. We have to unfortunately close this to go back and look to see what's happening. But the point is that there is a way of controlling these besides just shifting through them. And even if you're not interested in doing that, you can also look to see what some of these shapes do or look like when they're doing what they're doing. So that looks like a likely one, but what's Anyway, I find this fascinating. I'm definitely going to talk to the developer to see if he can give me some insight into how these things are made. He made them all, so hopefully there's some potential here, that some information here still to get, and we can get it.